Jessica, I am so happy to have you on the
Yeah.
podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Over the course of the weekend, I've been listening to your books, the book about World Without Human, and the other one was Dogs Unleashed.
Yeah, unleashing your dog. You got it.
Unleashing
Yeah.
Your Dog, that's the one. Yes, so brilliant. One of the first things that was clear to me was that the books were written in a dog-centered way,
hmm
and I thought that was vastly different from any other books I've read on dogs so far.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that that was the intention.
It's quite rare actually, because as I'm going through books, I'm realizing humans are always centered at the core of it, and this kind of shifted everything. I
Yeah.
kind of felt like this is what I've been thinking, this is what I've been feeling, and so
Yeah.
it validated those feelings and got me thinking about the dog's experience, which was just really wonderful. And obviously, I
Yeah.
continue to read them.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, you should especially look at Who's a Good Dog, my most recent, well, second to most recent, because that's why I really dig into that. Well, into a dog centered perspective on living ethically with them. So,
Wonderful. Well, all of your books seem to have this. I haven't read all of them, but I've read a lot of the summaries so far, and all of them have the common thread, which is obviously ethics. You're a bioethicist,
hmm
so I would love to understand more about what that means to a regular, everyday human who doesn't work in the sciences.
Sure. Um, so ethics is, and bioethics in particular, is the study of moral values and ethical quandaries that arise sort of at the intersection of human value making with the biological sciences. So, in particular, like most people who do bioethics are involved in medical ethics, biomedical ethics. And that was how I started. I worked in a medical school, taught medical students for a number of years. But to me, it's been really interesting to sort of develop that in the direction of ethology and evolutionary biology and these other biological sciences that also have a really profound impact on how we understand the natural world and the beings in that world and how we relate to them.
If we go back to when you were younger, how did your relationship with dogs start? Did you grow up with dogs in your family?
I did. One of my favorite stories about myself is that I am actually named after a dog. I'm named after my parents' Irish setter, Jessie. So I'm very proud of that. I like
It's
it's
gorgeous.
good
Irish
heritage.
setters are
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
so there were dogs in my life from, the embryonic stage. And I got my first dog. I was probably 9. Rufus was my first dog. And it sort of horrifies me now. But at the time, of course, I didn't know any better. But Rufus, I think, was one of the very first of the crossbred. He was supposedly a cockapoo. Not true. Like looking back on what he looked like and who he was, definitely not. But it was like the beginning of this interest in these designer dogs, I guess you could say. That would be the term of art now. But yeah, so I had dogs growing up as children. Our family would have 3 dogs at a time, which you can imagine the chaos, and
Yeah.
cats and lots of other things too. And then I went for a period without dogs when I was in school, in graduate school, and then began my life with dogs as an adult, and sort of being the prime caregiver and responsible person when I was about 30. So just before having a human child. So it's always been an interspecies household. And I now have just one dog, Bella, who's 14 and a half and is
Wow.
sadly not doing, she's really on that final down escalator, I think. And I'll be dog free for the first time in my life.
Wow. What would
Well,
that be like?
I don't know. I'm curious to see. On the one hand, I think it's going to be profoundly liberating because dogs are such a heavy responsibility. Their happiness and well-being is your job. And I think if you love your dog, that's it's a hard burden to just worry always about whether you're doing the right thing and doing the best that you can. And especially at this end of life stage, It's so heart-wrenching. I don't know if I can do it again, at least for a while, but it's gonna feel empty, I'm sure. It's gonna feel very empty without dogs, and
Yeah,
it probably won't last too long, but we'll see.
that's really tough. Did Bella influence how you view dogs now?
Absolutely. Each of the dogs that I've lived with has really changed who I am, which is how I think it should be. Co-creating each other, we and our dogs. Bella's lesson to me, to put it in a nutshell, was that dogs are not problems to be fixed, but are beings to be understood. Because Bella is, she doesn't fit the human cultural stereotype of what a good dog is, because she doesn't like people. Like, that's the main thing.
Right.
And except for her very small pack, which at the moment I think is about like 4 people. And those 4 people she loves intensely and is profoundly loyal to, but anybody else, she's not interested. And if you try to touch her on the head, she'll correct you. Um, and, she has her own ideas. Like, she is very trainable in the sense that she's very smart. She's a herding mix of some sort, very
Mhm.
smart. But she is so smart that I think she just sees that most of human efforts to train dogs are silly. Like, why does she need to do that? So it's been an exercise for me. And I think letting go of how I was thinking about control and how I was thinking about um, the human dog relationship, and really a loosening up, and I've learned to really respect canine boundaries and canine agency because of Bella, and just loving her for who she is.
Mhm.
We try to do that with our human family too. You love who you love, you are who you are, and we celebrate that. And so I think with our dog family members, I feel the same way. We take them for who they are and not try to change them into somebody else. Because, if you marry, for example, a human partner thinking they're going to change to become the person you want, it's probably not going to end well. And I think with dogs, we come at them with these expectations about what we want. And then when they don't fit into that box, we get very frustrated and upset. Sometimes we take them back to the shelter and say, I would, I'm going to turn this one in and get another. Sometimes we just sort of gut it out and feel frustrated and angry for our whole relationship. And I think sometimes then we come to this mutual understanding of, we are both our own people. Dogs are people too, in that
In their
sense.
own way,
Yeah.
absolutely. You touched on control. I'm curious about how control manifested for you and where those ideas come from for you specifically.
I think that my ideas about control came largely from the dog training literature, and this very strong narrative that to be a good, responsible dog owner, you have to be in control of your dog. I mean, how often do you hear that? You need to be in control of your dog. And there's very little room for nuance in that. Yes, you need to be able to control to some extent how your dog interacts with other people or other dogs when you're out in the world. Otherwise, there's a lot of potential for unsafe situations or unhappy neighbors and relations. The need to have a dog who is obedient. I hate that word too. That's one of those words that gets stuck in my. I think Bella invited me to see that obedience is not the goal, at least for me. And the goal is mutual understanding. Dogs, I think, are really motivated to collaborate with us, to cooperate with us. That's their kind of baseline, is this willingness to go with it, and to, I don't want to say to make us happy, because then I think that feeds into this narrative. Our dogs want to be good because they want us to love them. But, the idea, for example, I'm thinking back to my dog, a dog that I had before Bella, Maya, who she was a pointer mix, so this hunting dog, and very, very like prey motivated and really athletic. Like, she just wanted to run and sniff and chase. And the idea that I had in my mind, and that was instilled into me by various trainers and by the Humane Society in our town, the trainers there, who are wonderful. It's a wonderful place. Like, I don't mean any criticism of that, but this idea that she needed to walk behind me on heel, the leash needed to be loose, and that it was her responsibility to make sure the leash was loose. And it was her responsibility to follow those rules. And I started to think, those rules are not, like, it's kind of dumb. Why does a dog need to walk right behind my heel other than to show the world that I have perfect control, which is an ego thing for me. It's not really a well-being thing for my dog. And she pulled on the leash too, terribly. Like, her leash manners, if you were going to use the language of dog trainers, were awful. And I struggled and struggled and struggled against it. And I was told, you should try a prong collar. You should try,
Wow.
and this kind of escalating up, you should try a shock collar. And all this time I'm thinking, well, what am I trying to accomplish? All I'm trying to accomplish really is suppressing her desire to be herself and to run hard and chase and sniff and be a hunting dog. So just, I think that was a point of kind of questioning the human rules and how we apply them to dogs. And with Bella, that has continued because I don't have a problem with the leash. I don't need a leash because she's a herding dog, and she's right there right next to me, whether I want her to be or not. And that's where she's comfortable. But there are other things that come up. And you could call it non-compliance when a dog says no, but you could also call it a dog having an opinion. And that's where I am going these days. And if a dog is, I'm using scare quotes, for people who are just listening, if a dog is non-compliant, it means you're asking the dog to do something that is uncomfortable for them in some way. It's not because they're belligerent. It's because it's making them uncomfortable. So offer something else that doesn't make them uncomfortable.
What I found really interesting is your realization through all of this. If you think about your level of capacity in the day to day, there's only so much energy one can have, right? How did you manage to still fit in self awareness to ensure that your dog has a more optimal experience in this human world?
I think what I've found for me is that the more general trajectory of my life, which has involved a kind of a constant effort to become a better person, that doing that in a broad frame trickles down to my relationship with dogs and with Bella. So I've spent a lot of time, and it's easier now because my daughter's grown and out of the house. So I think you're absolutely right, though. I mean, there's a certain amount of emotional energy and time energy that you have to put into sort of figuring out what's going on with yourself and with those around you. But spent a lot of time in Eastern religious traditions and in the mindfulness literature. And the big takeaway for me from those teachings is that the source of your unhappiness is usually you, not other people or not events in the world, but how you respond to them. And that's true of relationships with other people. And I think also other animals, that um, there's a benefit to really exploring your own responses. So for me, it might be something as simple as, when Bella barks, and she doesn't bark a lot, but she does bark sometimes if there's a deer out in the yard or somebody's coming to deliver a package. Less and less because she's losing her hearing, which is sad. I'd rather her bark more. But her bark it's like it's right at that register that makes my blood pressure skyrocket. And it surprises me too. I'm not expecting it. And so my initial reaction might be irritation. It's like, you're interrupting my thought process or my interview or whatever. And really catching myself in those moments and saying, she's not barking in order to irritate me. She's barking in order to communicate something with me. And I should be grateful for that. She's giving me information about her and about my environment and protecting me, perhaps warning me. And so trying to reframe my own response. And in my book, Who's a Good Dog, that's really what I was exploring for myself and trying to help other people explore, is just the intellectual and also emotional responses that we have to our dogs. Are oftentimes more about us than them, and coming to them and being with them kind of as the best, most mature people we can be is a kindness to them. And, there's so much, this is a kind of a nuanced ethical point, but important for me. Like the emotional well being of our dogs is profoundly important. I mean, that's their happiness or unhappiness in this world. And it really is our responsibility because they are, by no choice of their own, trapped in this life with us. And when there's a lot of emotional synchronicity, and there's a lot of research on this in the dog psychology literature, that when we're stressed out, our dogs also get stressed out. So maybe we have a responsibility to try to manage our own internal environment because we're sharing that. We're sharing space and emotions with our dogs. So it's like the calmer we can be, the calmer they can be, and so forth.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot easier to be calm when you don't have children in the house and et cetera, full-time job. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's really interesting, at least in the United States, and I think it may be true elsewhere too, but there's a really strong sort of um, cultural narrative, which is that if you have children, you should have a dog because children benefit from, they love dogs, they benefit from having learning responsibility, et cetera, et cetera. And so this kind of completion of the family. So you see a lot of people with young children acquiring dogs, which I did too. And when I think back on my life, I think that was a really not a wise decision because I already have this sort of chaotic home and I'm introducing more chaos and trying to fit in, okay, we're going to go to soccer practice and while we're at soccer practice, then I'm going to walk the dog, and sort of, yeah, it becomes a chore and a thing you have to tick off instead of being able to really let your dog call the shots 50% of the time, which seems fair. They're really not getting to call the shots very often at all. And it ends up being really stressful. And I think back to my own experiences. And I'm like, why did I do that to myself? Because I love dogs. And I wanted my daughter to have that experience. And she loves animals too. She's now an ecologist. And so there's this strong urge, but I think maybe it's not also the best time to bring a dog into the mix for many families. Especially, I think people underestimate the financial burden of
Hmm.
having a dog. It was just this brought home in our extended family. My nephew had a rescue dog who he loved her. Sadly, she passed away about a week ago. She was
I'm
euthanized
sorry.
because she had a bowel obstruction. The terrible, but the financial costs to him of the medical interventions leading up to her eventual euthanizing were tremendous. And he's like kid who can be, he's having trouble getting a job and, paying his rent. And then on top of that, now he's got this extra burden. So I think it'd be nice if there were a little more transparency in how much work it is to have a dog and how much it costs to take good care of a dog. And ultimately, I sound kind of like a curmudgeon because I think fewer people should have dogs. There should be fewer dogs in the world. Be like, how can you say that if you love dogs? It's like I say that because I love dogs.
I completely agree with you. It feels so heavy on my heart knowing that, so many people are buying puppies without understanding fully what they are buying and what they are essentially committing to. Of course, it's a personal choice, but I think just having the level of awareness that I do through the podcast and speaking to people in rescue, you kind of it's a level of awareness that I guess the average person, unless you're interested in those things, wouldn't be privy to. And so there's a conflict there. How do we move forward? Yeah, there's so many different issues at this
Yeah.
moment in time.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I have the same kind of emotional. It's a kind of a dissonance, loving dogs and loving the on the individual level, but yet having a dog sort of buys you into so many of these institutional patterns and structures that are really bad for dogs. And I've that's why it's a really interesting area for an ethicist too, because there are these multiple layers of things going on, and somebody purchasing um, a Frenchie, currently the most popular breed in the United States, is not thinking about extreme conformation and brachycephaly and the health problems that come with that. I, in my critical moments, want to say, well, you should be thinking about that. You should be aware of the implications of the choices that you're making, consumer choices. And dogs shouldn't be consumer products in the first place. And the fact that we're exchanging money for them gives us a sense that we have a right to treat them as objects, as products, and not as beings.
Where do you think humans drop the ball in our interpretation or understanding of the human dog relationship?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, how much time do we have left? Okay. Um, okay. So, I mean, one example that comes really immediately to mind is if you go into a Petco or a PetSmart, these big box pet stores, and go to the training aisle, you'll find, shelf after shelf after shelf of shock collars and bark deterrents, electric fences, ultrasonic, etc. And I think that's a dropping the ball, because we are, first of all, we're assigning to dog behavior a natural dog behavior, barking. Let's take that example. We're saying barking is bad without understanding that, for a canid, a dog, and not all canids bark like the domestic dog. Barking has evolved in really unique and interesting ways in Canis familiaris. And in particular, barking has evolved as, at least this is the speculation by researchers, as a way for dogs to communicate with us, which is perhaps why wolves don't bark in the same way or as much as domestic dogs, just to throw out one example. So we take this behavior that we have shaped through our coevolution and our domestication of dogs, that clearly is adaptive for dogs, and we label it a bad behavior, something dogs shouldn't do, and then we buy products that punish them for doing it, and it makes them crazy. Like, if you look at the veterinary literature, the statistics on anxiety and stress in companion dogs is that they're off the charts. I mean, I saw one recently that said that 99% of dogs, in this large study, the owners reported some level of anxiety, stress, behavioral disturbance. And like, that's not normal. That's a dropping the ball. I think how we frame and how we respond to behaviors is a big thing. And this whole, if you look at a list of bad behaviors, like even in the veterinary literature and the training literature, you'll see barking, digging, roaming, jumping up on people, counter surfing. These are all dogs being dogs. Like, a dog chasing a squirrel is not a bad dog.
No.
It's a dog doing a dog thing. And so we have this list of behaviors that we find annoying or inappropriate or disobedient or whatever language you want to put around them. And we punish dogs for doing them. And so dogs aren't really allowed to be who they are. I think the breeding of dogs is really, we're dropping the ball in a major way there. I mean, I think there are some efforts to try to do things better, but the breeding of dogs for teacup size, for example, which is a big thing here, like, the smaller you can make the dog, the better, the cuter, and so they can fit in your handbag. It's not good for dogs at all. Making dogs with really short legs and really long bodies, they're funny to look at, but it's not good for the dog. We drop the ball in social media as it relates to dogs all the time. I just saw a new academic article yesterday. I haven't read it yet, but the title caught my attention. It was some about how social media, cute, like funny dog videos, are usually not funny from the dog's point of view. And like, one that comes to mind that I've watched a few times because it's like, I can't quite believe that somebody's doing this, but it's really popular. It gets a lot of hits. This guy dresses up as a T-Rex in this great big dinosaur costume and comes into the room, and the dog is scared out of its mind and just like racing around. And I didn't say I said her mind, not his, I just
Yeah.
did that. It's a process. And you can tell it's staged too. It's like, why would you do that? That's cruel. But everybody laughs and thinks it's funny. And so I'll stop there. I mean, I could go on and on. I think it's interesting to me. I went, and you said you wanted to talk about this, and we can if you still want to. But the reason I started writing about dogs about 15, 20 years ago was because I had been in my work in biomedical ethics in the medical setting. I had been working on sustainability and like environmental environmental degradation and climate change. And I was like daily just immersed in this literature about how bad things are for the planet, and like really scary existential risk sorts of things. I wasn't sleeping well. I was really, really stressed out. And I'm like, I need a change. I need to work in an area that makes me happy. And dogs make me happy. So I wrote my first book about dogs, which wasn't really a happy topic. It was about my dog Odie's last year of life and just having to navigate end of life decisions for him, which I found so profoundly difficult and really complex ethically. So anyway, even though it was a sad topic, it was wonderful because I was talking to people about their dogs and, working with dog people and vets and so forth. And I've loved it up until about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And then it started to not feel fun anymore because, like, just being immersed always in the dog literature and the dog veterinary literature and the training literature and the welfare literature, dogs are really suffering. And it's not that people are bad, it's just there are all these, ball droppings or just ways in which somehow our trajectory has gone off the rails. And it just got to be hard. And instead of when I see somebody out walking their dog, instead of feeling joyful and seeing that, I'd feel depressed. I'd say, oh God, they've got a bark collar on, or oh God, they're tugging on the leash, and, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just had stepped away from it for a little while. I feel better now, but it's hard if you love dogs, and you may experience this yourself, just being kind of immersed in this world. There's a
It's
lot of
hard.
sadness.
And the more you know, the more it hurts.
Yeah.
Like, I smile and I laugh about it because it's ironic, There is bliss in ignorance.
Yes, there is indeed.
So you've written a lot of amazing, amazing books. I've only read two of them, but I know that they are amazing because they are so thought-provoking and I think interesting, and really gets us to, essentially, I feel they align with the ethos of this podcast. And I was thinking, would you ever consider writing a book from a dog's perspective
Yes.
on humans?
Yes, A Dog's World, which I think is one that you have read, that Mark Beckoff and I wrote together, was an attempt to do that to some extent. Like, it was like a meta thought experiment. What would it be like for dogs as a species if humans disappeared? But in terms of writing from a dog perspective within a family system or something on that more micro level, I think the book that I just finished is kind of an attempt to do that, sort of. It's called How to Be a Good Human, and
Oh, I love that.
it's a companion to my book Who's a Good Dog. It's not how to be, it's Who's a Good Human. So, companion to Who's a Good Dog. And it's a human training book written, you could say, from a dog's perspective. Like, what would be helpful for us to think about as humans living with dogs to improve our relationships with them. And it's things like, inviting people to think differently about barking, to, like, through understanding that barking is a sophisticated form of communication between dogs and humans, and responding to it with curiosity rather than irritation, or this is something I need to stop. Seeing it instead as part of this really interesting coevolution, or, just understanding what we're bringing to the table emotionally and how that's impacting our dog. It would be interesting. I mean, that's an intriguing idea, though, to really try to, that I don't know what it would look like. I'll think about it. I'll get back to you.
Okay. Well, you have your first customer.
All right.
I am sure it will be brilliant and very thought provoking. In one of your books, I think it's Unleashing the Dog, I first became aware of the term, I think it was a learned helplessness.
Uh-huh.
And I found that really interesting because I think my foster dog, Juna, was in that frame of mind before she came to me. And it's been really interesting to see her respond with her agency.
Mm-hmm.
So I give her agency. And so seeing her, it's almost like she initially didn't trust it. And
Yeah.
now she's kind of pushing boundaries ever so slightly, let me see what I can do
Yeah.
here. So it's really interesting to see that kind of moral life
Mm-hmm.
evolve. Because if I had thoughts about control, she'd be in trouble. But actually, I'd see it as exploration. And, how lovely is it that she's learning to feel safe, and she lets me know she wants to walk around the block that way. She wants to eat now instead of later. She, whatever it might be, she's not interested in playing this game, and she goes and she sleeps. And I could give you lots of different examples, but what are some ways that dogs learn this helplessness, and what does that look like in a dog from your experience?
So I think the way this gets ingrained in a dog is when something they're exposed to a negative stimulus of some sort and they can't get away from it. They try and they can't get away from it, and it happens again and again, and every time they try to get away from it, it's unsuccessful. So they just stop trying to get away from it and kind of shut down emotionally. Um, and I think what it would look like is kind of what you're describing this as a kind of a dog who is scared of her own shadow, is just shut down and afraid to explore, afraid to be themselves. And so I think like a dog who every time they bark, they get scolded or punished, they're going to eventually learn that it doesn't work, and they're going to get shut down emotionally. And I think the way you phrased it was really beautiful because it suggests that rather than like a dog who's starting to push boundaries or not comply and explore on their own and really be their own person is actually a wonderful thing. It's not a dog starting to be bad. It's a dog starting to be good and starting to really feel safe in their environment. And that's a beautiful thing. So I think really, one of the lessons there is that punishment-based training is not very effective in the long term. People think it gets results, and it does in the very short term. But the results come at great cost because of, the emotional consequences for the dog of this kind of experience of just getting every time you do something, you get hurt. You just stop trying and you just shut down. You stop trying to do anything. So, and I always kind of think about analogs to human parenting. And, I think if you had a child who always was perfect and did absolutely everything and never pushed a boundary, you might worry. Like you want them to do that. You want them to have some spunk and, within reason and be their own person. Just say, no, no, that's not who I am. That's not what I like. I like this. I'm going to do this. And instead of you see some kids who are just sort of cowed by parental pressures to be a certain way or behave a certain way. And I just feel sad when I see that rather than, they might look very well behaved, but they're not very happy.
That could be the learned helplessness.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Yeah. You mentioned some of the negative stimuli. What could some of those things be that people wouldn't normally think of?
I think that, it could be a lot of things, and some of which are really subtle. And, I might make some trainers angry if I say this, but I think some obvious things would be like a shock collar. That's obviously going to be a negative. That's a punishment in the behavioral modification term, something that is unpleasant. And there are some more benign, putting those as sort of in scare quotes, things that people, are often told to do, like spray a dog in the face with water. Like it's not going to do any lasting physical damage, but that's a punishment. It's startling and unpleasant. Even ignoring a dog. I mean, we're often told if a dog is bugging you, ignore them. That's unpleasant. That's, emotionally unpleasant for a dog and scary, perhaps. This person that you're totally dependent on, and we make our dogs totally dependent on us physically, emotionally, like they can't survive without our help and our affection. So to take that away, to me, seems cruel.
I would agree. There were, again, I read about this in your book, things even such as noise in
Noise,
the
yeah.
environment. I thought that was really interesting because that's not something I would have considered before.
Yeah, and that's a good example of like these aren't things that we're doing to our dog in order to try to shape their behavior, but things that are like potentially like negative sensory stimulation, overstimulation in the environment that can have a really profound impact on our dog's well-being would be things like the acoustic environment. If we think about how sensitive their ears are and how much they can hear that we can't, then to put them in a home where there's a microwave beeping and there's traffic going by and there are sirens and TVs and music and all of this sensory stimulation, none of it bad per se, but it's a lot. And there's been a little bit of research on acoustic stress in dogs, drawing an analogy to research in the human realm, which I think is quite relevant to dogs. A lot of research in the last decade or so on the effects of noise on human physiology and, the long-term health effects of living in, for example, a very congested traffic area or where there's just a lot of background noise are pretty profound. And the same is very likely true of dogs. And there was a study of dogs who lived near a football stadium I forget exactly, was it in Spain or I forget. But anyway, it was a study of their stress level on game days versus non-game days. And on game days, it's all this loud cheering and, human noise and not, it's a predictable outcome, right? On those very loud game days, the dog's stress level was quite a bit higher. So I think one of the kindnesses we can offer our dogs is to be dog-centered, like pretend that you are your dog for a little while and pretend that your hearing was very acute and just, wander around, crawl around your house on four legs and see what your dog might be hearing. And a lot of it you won't even hear, but they will. And I think just, make a map of your dog's soundscape. And if you do that and then maybe spend some time observing their behavior around different sounds or maybe at different times of day, if you live in an area where there's a lot of car traffic or foot traffic, do you notice any behavioral differences in your dog during those high traffic times? And just become an observer, a naturalist in your home and see what you can see. The same goes for the smell environment. Dogs, their noses are unbelievable. I was just reading a study of dogs being able to basically they can smell our DNA, our genes, and they can distinguish, like they'll know that people are identical twins because they smell the same. And it's super interesting. Anyway, like their nose is amazing. So, and we talk about this in Unleashing Your Dog, Mark and I, about we call it scent identity, that, like we have for ourselves, maybe how we look, how we present ourselves visually to the world is important because humans are very visual creatures. But for dogs, it's really like a smell scent, a scent identity. It's how dogs recognize and communicate with each other through their olfactory sense. So there are a couple of things. One thing is that we don't often give dogs time enough to smell each other or smell their environment. So we're depriving them of some really important sensory information when we do that, when we like tug them along on a leash. There's nothing there. What are you doing smelling? Like, well, there actually is. There's a lot there. Or thinking, don't smell that dog's pee. That's gross. No, the dogs actually need to smell each other's pee. They're sending a lot of information to each other that way. So letting them smell like themselves is one thing. Like we think it's a good idea to give our dogs baths, once a week in cherry blossom shampoo. We might like it, but I don't think our dogs particularly like it because they don't smell like themselves anymore. And also when our homes are full of, detergents and cleaners and fabric softeners and this and that and the other thing. I mean, it's a smell environment that we probably don't notice that much, but for our dogs, it's really, I'm sure they're acutely aware of it. And again, it's probably overstimulating for them.
100%. Just last night, I keep talking about Duna, but it's just the only example I have at the moment. I did my laundry yesterday and I don't typically use fabric softener, but I recently smelled a really delicious smelling fabric softener. And I thought, oh, I'll buy this and try it. I hung my laundry next to my bed in my bedroom, next to the radiator. And last night was the first time she didn't want to come to bed. And I
Interesting.
did think, because of your book this morning, I was like, oh, I wonder if it's because of the smell. As in, like, it's too overpowering. It was right next to the bed. So that would make perfect sense with hindsight.
That's a great example. It's perfect. And it's wonderful that you thought that. Like that's what I want people to do after reading my books, is start to notice those sorts of things and pay attention to them because they're, first of all, really interesting. And second of all, have a big impact on our dogs and our relationship with our dogs. And so the more we can be canine scientists in our own homes, we are all scientists of canine behavior if we live with a dog. And I think one thing that happens that's unfortunate is we get kind of scared of our own interpretations and we think, oh, I need to ask an expert or read a book by an expert. And I would say no. I mean, that's helpful too. Do that too. Although be careful what kind of expert, because a lot of people who claim that they're experts in dog behavior are not actually. But trust your own observations, make your own observations, and be a citizen scientist in your own house in this unique ecosystem of you, your family, and your dog. It's, I think, the best way to understand your dog and to be a better human for your dog. So I highly encourage that.
Well, I think it all starts with intention, right? The intention to want to either understand the dog or want to be a better human being. Because I do see a lot of crossover there. Observing and opening your eyes and really noticing someone else's experience has a knock on effect in all relationships that we have, and being
Yeah.
able to like interpret communication.
Yeah, exactly. Making it, we have, I think, a tendency as humans to kind of make it all about us. And like that's one of the key teachings of the mindfulness literature is it's not all about us. You know, it's one of my very favorite quotes from Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist teacher, is you are the sky, everything else is just the weather. And I really love that. And I think about that in relation to Bella and to dogs in general. We need to recognize the weather and not get um, too pulled into that and just step back and be the sky.
I would love to know what drives you. What pushes you to keep going, and perhaps also what questions are still left unanswered?
I think what drives me is um, I hate to see animals suffer. I hate to see people suffer too. I just have focused more on animals recently. Although I will say when I really started to feel burned out in the dog arena, I decided to become a volunteer firefighter. And so I
Wow.
about 2 years ago, I started volunteering and it's really been I love it. It's amazing. It's so much I mean, fun isn't the right word. We use fun as type 2 fun, the phrase that we use a lot. Like most people would look at what you're doing and think, "Oh my god, that looks awful." But to us it's fun, you know, crawling around through mazes with air tanks on. But it's been a good reminder to me that humans are suffering too. And I think I one of my core values is service. I want to help others. So one way to do that is, you know, being a first responder. And another way to do that is trying to help people understand who dogs are so that they can be better humans, more understanding. And yeah, I think really that drives me in. I mean, it's my own quest too to and the reason I'm probably in the field of ethics is that it matters to me that I live a good life. Good as in I want to be a responsible and contributing part of society, um, and self-improvement always. And I think that we talked about that a little before, just when I can have insights about myself, those almost always have trickled down into my relationships with animals and people.
You mentioned about Bella coming towards the end of her life. It's obviously very sensitive. This will be your third time having to
Yes.
make a very difficult decision. What questions are going through your mind, knowing what you know about your previous experiences, but also with Bella specifically?
Yeah, and I will say, to start off, it's not uncomfortable for me.
Okay.
It's difficult because it's emotional, but I think one of the things that's really hard about end of life care, and this was my first book about dogs, The Last Walk, is that people are afraid to talk about it. And I think because it's so painful and so raw. And, you know, if you start talking about this with somebody who has experienced it, you'll both be, you know, sobbing before long. Some of the things that are going through my mind, Bella is 14 and a half. When she was 9, she had an accident jumping off ATV. She tore her cruciate ligament in her knee. It's not the cruciate ligament in a dog, but the human equivalent. And on the advice of our veterinarian, she had surgery to repair the ligament, and it didn't work. She seemed okay at first. After, I mean, it's a horrible surgery. Like a month of being on the floor with her and just crying and pain. And she went out to pee one day and it just popped out of place. So, on the advice of our veterinarian, we did a second surgery where they actually like cut the bone and they do this kind of, they put a plate in. And anyway, long story short, she's physically disabled and has been for a number of years. And I think that kind of set off a cascade of mobility issues, so that, her hips are really arthritic. Her feet are really like flattened out and arthritic. So basically, it hurts her to walk. She can walk enough to go outside to pee. But when we go on walks, we put her in a stroller, which I'm happy to say she loves. She loves her stroller. It's so cute. She sticks her head out the top and she gets a treat every time she gets out and gets back in. And sometimes just because she's cute. She stopped eating about a month ago, almost completely. And her regular food had no interest, and treats some interest, but not too much. And that really got us concerned and got us talking about the end that is, I know it's around the corner somewhere. Bella's been diagnosed, by the way, with cancer twice, but she's, I don't
A
know.
fighter.
She's tough. It doesn't seem to be the thing that's driving her decline at the moment. She's developed some Alzheimer's, like in dogs, it's canine cognitive dysfunction. And at night, it's called sundowning. At night, dogs will get very confused and kind of disoriented and anxious. So we've had to adapt a lot of aspects of our house environment. We have like all the floors are covered because she doesn't have great control of her bladder. So there are a fair number of accidents. That doesn't bother us. That's, it's not a big deal. You clean it up. I shouldn't say it's not I don't want to underemphasize that it's a caregiving challenge. It is, but it's not too bad for us. She's running into things now. Her vision is pretty limited. So she'll sometimes run into a corner when she thinks it's the door, but the door is actually, like a foot over. I don't know, the shadows, but so we leave the lights on now all the time because that seems to help. And I mean, I think it's just like a daily tracking of her quality of life as we perceive it, my husband and I, and it's good. We have two people and, we're pretty on track with each other, but just checking in. And it's almost become a joke now. We try to kind of give on a scale of 1 to 5, what kind of day was it? And for a while there, we were having days where it was like a 2 or even a 1.5.
Is that from your perspective or what for her?
From what we think she's feeling like. So yeah, how she's doing as best as we can understand it. And I think at this point in an animal's life, you have to do two things at once that are contradictory. You have to keep in your mind that you aren't a dog and you're not this dog, so that all of the feelings and thoughts that you're attributing, there's a level of uncertainty, and we can't get inside another being's experience, human or dog. And it's more difficult when it's a different species and they can't speak. But so it's from her perspective as we understand it. And, I think it's equally hard with humans. We've lost all of our parents now.
I'm sorry.
And, each one is difficult in its own unique way. But one thing that I learned, especially when my mother passed away, is it's really difficult to know, even when somebody's telling you, I want this or I want that, whether that's actually what they want or whether they think that's what you want to hear. Anyway, we have this point system, and now it's kind of a joke. Oh, Bella, you just, she barks at a deer in the yard. You got a point. Like any little sign of spunk. When she stopped eating, Bella's been a vegan dog for a number of years, but I had to set that principle aside, and we bought her some hot dogs and some turkey. Hot dogs she liked for a day or two, but then that kind of lost interest. But she seems to enjoy turkey, which horrifies me. But also, that's what she needs. So, it's day by day and week by week. I try to track trends over time. because, I think the way Bella is declining, it's going to be, I suspect, a kind of a slow, gradual process rather than some illness that's going to take her really rapidly into a quick and significant decline. And in a way, this is the hardest scenario because it's just these little incremental changes. And when do you know that when do you decide you don't know? When do you think you've tipped into this place where the balance is not in her favor? And I guess that's what we're trying to do every day and week by week is just track whether her desire to be alive and whether her enjoyment of the things that she still enjoys are enough. And then, at some point, I think we'll have to agree that it's not enough and that the pain and discomfort or disorientation, anxiety are outweighing her good experiences. And I've thought about this enough and been through it enough to, we talk about it very openly. I've talked about it with her vet already. We've talked about a plan. I think for most dogs if you decide on euthanasia, it's wonderful if you can do it in the home, in the place that they're comfortable. I think for Bella, that rule doesn't hold because she gets very uncomfortable when people come into her space that she doesn't know. So I think with Bella, we'll probably, unless there's some unforeseen circumstance, we'll probably take her to the veterinary office for euthanasia. I do suspect that we will choose euthanasia and rather than natural death because her decline is so it's slow and kind of insidious, but I don't know
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, that's really tricky, isn't it? Like observing their suffering, but also wanting them to come to the end of their life with dignity.
Yes, it's the hardest thing we have to do as people who love animals, I think, is to make that decision. And, with your human loved ones, you don't have to make that decision usually. They can make the decision for themselves. And
Right.
it's so much easier that way. I mean, it's still gut punch and awful, but I think when we have that final moment in our hands as our responsibility, that's huge.
It's
And leaves people, I think, with long-term feelings of guilt and trauma and regret and pain. I wish I could take that away. I think it's inevitable. But I think the more you talk about it, with yourself, talk to your vets, talk to your loved ones. I listen to other people, sort of. Like when we take Bella to a dog park up the road from us in the mountains, and she can't walk very far. She can maybe 20, 30 feet, but we can get in the gate. She loves to go in and sniff, and she loves other dogs. So that's like an enrichment we can still do with her. But I see people watching her because she walks with it's very obvious disability, and she looks in pain I know it's painful for her to walk. And I see looks of pity. And I wonder how many people are thinking, you're a mean person for keeping her alive. I don't think that myself. Like I trust our intuitions in this decision making, but I also do. I take that in when people are saying that. I'm like, am I too close to this and love her too much to see what's in front of me?
Yeah. Well, if there was no human intervention, nature would take its course. So I think anything other than that is very difficult, but at the same time could be a blessing.
Yeah, it's hard though. I mean, the terrain is so morally complex. Like the food issue is really difficult for me because I think on the one hand, if she is choosing not to eat, that's a choice. That's her choice. And I don't want to force it on her. And, if that's what happens at the end of a person or animal's life is that they stop eating or slow way down in their eating. And so I don't want to hijack that natural process by forcing her to eat. At the same time, I have control over all her food choices. So, like offering her a range also seems like something I should do. So, I don't know. I don't know what I should do.
Yeah. But you are doing your best, and I think that matters. And
Yeah.
she'll know that.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, it's not your one decision is not going to honor an entire lifetime of evidence for her.
Yeah.
You've had a
It's
journey together, and,
yeah,
you know, this is very difficult. I'm sure no one would want to be in that position, and I think you are doing the best with the information that you have. Uh,
yeah. So,
so yeah,
but I mean, I don't think that death is necessarily like it's just a natural part of life. And um, when someone we love dies, we mourn and we also celebrate. Not that they're gone, but we celebrate that they were here
yeah,
and celebrate what we shared. It's, it will be okay.
you will. You will. I hope you have a lovely celebration when the
Thank
time
you.
comes. If not already, I mean, you can already celebrate her life. To leave us on a, I guess, I don't want to say positive because I don't see talking about end of life as a negative, but to leave us on a more uplifted note, what gives you hope about the future of dogs?
Well, podcasts like this, people like you who are really, and people listening, who are interested in this sort of thing, really trying to understand their dogs as individuals and meet them where they are and who they are. And I see so much. I mean, I've talked about some of the harder things that I see, but I see so much love between humans and dogs, and so much commitment on the part of humans to do the right thing for their dog. And it's hard because you don't know what it is always, or you don't have enough information to do it always. But I see people trying and with so much goodwill and so much effort. And so I think the more of that there is, and people really just taking the commitment seriously, that gives me hope. And seeing young people who really aren't falling into some of the same traps maybe as older generations in terms of how to train or how to interact, or I do see a lot of people really trying to have relationships where their dogs have agency and have autonomy, and they're their own person and not just a reflection, a shadow of us.
I agree with you. I am hopeful about the newer generation. Definitely, there are some behaviours that seem very different from at least what I grew up with, and what I love about the younger generation is that they're not afraid to go against the grain.
Yes.
They have a kind of confidence or courage that I wouldn't have dreamed of having when I was a child in the 80s.
Yeah. 100% agree. Yeah. I I love that about, and not just about dogs, but about so many aspects of life.
Living,
Just
yeah.
courage to be different. Be different. Because I think the same old rules that we've lived by are not, they're not working very well for dogs. So we really do need to be different.
Well, Jessica, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that our conversation has given listeners a lot to think about, and that it leaves them feeling a bit more connected with their dog.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It was a really nice conversation, and yeah,
Oh,
glad you're doing this work.